Hello, my name is Seth Alden, 33 years old. I'm a freelance building designer living in a small apartment in Austin, Texas, a place where the sun blazes like fire in the summer and the tree-lined streets are always alive with music drifting from the bars. My apartment isn't anything special. An old scratched wooden table, a worn-out armchair, and a few haphazardly hung sketches on the walls. But to me, this place is an entire world. A world I built myself, brick by brick, with every drop of sweat and every sleepless night spent redrawing dreams that nearly shattered. I'm not one to dwell on the past, but you know, some stories cling to you, like shadows trailing light. And my story perhaps begins in the days when I was a quiet boy in Houston, Texas, living in the enormous shadow of the Alden family. I was born in Houston, in a house so large that every step I took seemed to echo. My father, Gregory Alden, was the president of Alden Construction, a major construction conglomerate, an empire built by my grandfather, Franklin Alden. My grandfather was a stern but fair man who turned rough sketches into skyscrapers and bridges that spanned rivers. But I was never close to him. When I was young, he left Houston to live in Europe, leaving the company to my father. I only remember him through old photographs with his piercing eyes and rare smiles. My mother, my father's first wife, is a faint figure in my memory. She passed away when I was 4, leaving a void I never knew how to fill. I only recall fragmented memories, the gentle scent of her perfume, a warm embrace, and her soft lullabies on rainy nights. After her death, my father changed. He became distant, cold, as if her passing had taken a part of him with it. 2 years later, he married Camille, my stepmother. And then Jet was born, my half-brother, the child the entire family doted on like a prince. I don't blame Jet. He was just a kid, and kids aren't at fault. But growing up in his shadow, I always felt like the odd one out. Jet had golden hair, a radiant smile, and a knack for charming anyone with a single wink. And me? I was the skinny, quiet boy, always buried in architecture books or scribbling imaginary houses. My father would look at me with disappointment, as if I were an unfinished draft, unworthy of the Alden name. "You're too much like your mother," he once said, his tone both sorrowful and bitter. "Weak. No fire." Camille never treated me like her own. She wasn't cruel, but the way she looked at me, cold, distant, made it clear I didn't belong in her world. Whenever Jet broke a vase or caused a commotion, she'd laugh it off, ruffle his hair, and say, "Oh, my boy." But if I so much as spilled a glass of water, she'd glare at me with eyes sharp as knives, as if I'd committed an unforgivable sin. I grew up in a world of comparisons. Jet got new clothes and attended prestigious private schools. I wore hand-me-downs, went to public school, and figured things out on my own. But I wasn't jealous. I just wanted to prove I had worth, that I wasn't the weakling my father thought I was. I loved drawing, loved how lines on paper could become living structures. Every time I finished a sketch, I felt closer to my mother, who, as my father once mentioned, also loved architecture and art. When I was 15, I started working part-time at a local woodworking shop. I learned to measure, cut, and assemble. The workers there, with their calloused hands and genuine smiles, taught me more than any textbook could. They called me Young Alden and teased that I'd build an entire city when I grew up. I laughed, but deep down I knew that was my dream. I wanted to create structures that bore my own mark, not the shadow of Alden Construction. But that dream wasn't easy. My father never encouraged me to pursue design. "Architecture is child's play," he said. "If you want to succeed, you need to learn to lead, to control." He wanted me to be like him, a tough, decisive man ready to crush anyone in his way. But I wasn't him. I didn't want to crush anyone. I just wanted to build. When I went to college, I chose to study architecture, despite my father's objections. He wanted me to study business management, but I was determined to follow my passion. Those college years were a rare taste of freedom. I lived away from home, far from my father's judgmental gaze and Camille's coldness. I worked part-time on construction sites, learned to read technical drawings, and slowly built a small reputation among my peers. But every time I returned home, I felt the distance between me and my family. Jet, then only 13, was already being taken to company events by my father, introduced as the future heir. And me? I was just the quiet older son, never invited to take the stage. When I was 21, my stepmother threw a lavish birthday party for Jet's 15th birthday. The world seemed to revolve around him. I stood in the corner holding a glass of water, watching as everyone clapped when Jet blew out his candles. My father clapped, laughed loudly, and said, "That's my boy." I felt my existence was little more than a faint shadow. Camille didn't even invite me to be in the family photo. I left the party early, drove back to my dorm, and sat in the dark, wondering if I'd ever find my place in this family. Those memories, though more than a decade old, are still as sharp as a blade. I don't hate my father, Camille, or Jet, but I can't forget the feeling of being abandoned, of being an outsider in my own home. And perhaps those years shaped me into a quiet, resilient Seth Alden carrying a wound that never fully heals. When I graduated college, I stood at a crossroads. My father wanted me to join Alden Construction under his control. I knew it wasn't the path I wanted, but I had no choice. The family company was a massive machine, and whether I liked it or not, I was part of it. I entered Alden Construction hoping to prove my worth, but I didn't expect it to be the start of a silent battle. One where I had to face not only my father, but also myself. I started working at Alden Construction on an autumn morning when I was 23. The company's headquarters stood in the heart of Houston, a gleaming glass building that towered as if challenging the sky itself. I still remember the stifling feeling as I passed through the revolving doors. The smell of coffee mingling with the hum of printers and the laughter of senior staff. I wasn't assigned to the upper floors with their luxurious offices. Instead, I was sent to the workshop, where workers in orange safety vests toiled tirelessly. My job was to inspect sites, oversee material quality, and handle the minor risks no one else bothered with. My monthly salary was enough to cover rent for a small apartment and buy a few technical books, but it was never generous. Meanwhile, my younger brother Jet joined the company 3 years later at the age of 20. He had no college degree, no qualifications, just a confident smile and the Alden name on his business card. Yet on his first day, our father appointed him vice president of the marketing department. I heard the news while inspecting a faulty batch of concrete at a suburban construction site. A colleague, a guy named Mike with calloused hands, clapped me on the shoulder and said, "You okay, Seth? You've worked your ass off for 4 years to become a supervisor, and your little brother waltzes in and gets an air-conditioned office." I gave a faint smile and shook my head. "It's just how it is, Mike." But it wasn't just how it is. Every day at work felt like a race against an opponent who never tired. Jet's shadow. He worked on the upper floors in an office with glass walls overlooking the city. His job involved attending fancy meetings, meeting major clients, and appearing in business magazine photos with his dazzling smile. He was celebrated at company galas, introduced by our father to partners as the future of Alden Construction. And me? I was down at the construction sites covered in dust, checking every weld, every brick, and writing reports no one bothered to read. I didn't envy Jet, honestly, but I couldn't ignore the unfairness. I spent countless nights studying blueprints, learning to optimize construction costs, and finding ways to minimize risks for the company. I once proposed a new quality control system that saved tens of thousands of dollars a month, but my father just nodded and passed the credit to another manager. Meanwhile, Jet would pitch a half-baked advertising idea and the entire boardroom would erupt in applause. "That's my boy," my father would say, his voice brimming with pride, while I sat at the end of the table quietly taking notes. I tried not to let it get to me. I told myself my work mattered, that the structures I oversaw would stand for decades, that I was doing the right thing. But the whispers behind my back never stopped. Once I overheard a group of senior staff talking in the break room. "Seth, he's just a workhorse doing the grunt work, no vision whatsoever." Another smirked. Definitely not the air. Gregory only trusts Jet. I stood outside the door, my hands clenched so tightly my nails dug into my palms. I didn't walk in or argue. I just went back to the site and kept working. But not everyone looked down on me. Some of the workers in the workshop, the ones I worked alongside, began to respect me. They saw I wasn't afraid to get dirty, to stand under the scorching sun checking every detail. An older worker, Hank, once told me, "You've got the eyes of a builder, Seth. Not the kind who sits in an air-conditioned office, but the kind who truly understands a project." Those words were like medicine, keeping me going even when I wondered what I was striving for. Then came the day everything exploded. It was a routine shareholder meeting when I was 28. I was called in to present a report on a recently completed project. I'd worked day and night to keep that project on schedule, despite a last-minute issue with a faulty batch of materials. I personally contacted the supplier and negotiated a replacement without increasing costs. The project was completed on time, without a single flaw. I walked into the meeting room with a rare sense of pride, thinking this time my father might see me differently. I was wrong. As I was presenting, an executive raised his hand to interrupt. "Seth, did you check that batch of concrete? There's a report saying it didn't meet standards." I froze. I had checked that batch 3 times and it was perfectly up to standard. I tried to explain, but before I could finish, my father stood up, his voice thundering. "Seth, what kind of work is this? You couldn't even catch a small mistake, putting the whole company at risk." He looked around the room, his eyes icy. "This is why I never give you major responsibilities. You're not capable." The room fell deathly silent. I felt the blood rush to my face, not from shame, but from anger. I wanted to shout, to say it wasn't my mistake, that I'd done everything to save the project. But I just stood there, gripping my documents, feeling the weight of the world's contemptuous stares. Jet, sitting in the corner, smirked. Just a slight smirk, but it felt like a knife straight to my heart. After the meeting, I sat in my car, staring out at Houston's bustling streets. I didn't cry. I'm not the type to cry easily. But something inside my chest shattered. I realized that no matter how hard I tried, my father would never acknowledge me. I'd always be the weak son, unworthy of the Alden name. That night, I wrote my resignation letter. I didn't send it right away. I left it on my desk, staring at the words for 3 days. I wondered if I had the courage to leave Alden Construction, to walk away from the name that had defined my entire life. Then I thought of my mother, of the stories my father used to tell about her. A woman who loved design, loved beauty, and never feared standing up for what she believed in. I folded the letter, slipped it into an envelope, and the next morning I placed it on my father's desk. He looked at the letter, then at me, his eyes full of contempt. "You think you can survive out there, Seth? Without the Alden name backing you, you're nothing." He laughed, a cold, challenging laugh. "Go ahead and try, but don't come crawling back when you fail." I said nothing. I just turned and walked away, carrying a backpack with a few clothes and the sketches I'd drawn back in college. I didn't know where I was going or what I'd do. But I knew one thing. I couldn't keep living in the shadow of Alden Construction. I wanted to build something of my own, no matter how small or difficult. I wanted to prove I didn't need the Alden name to survive. Leaving Alden Construction felt like shedding a heavy burden, but it also felt like stepping into a storm I wasn't prepared to face. Houston still gleamed with its towering skyscrapers, but I no longer belonged to that world. I rented a small room on the outskirts near an old construction site where the smell of dust and the sound of drilling echoed day and night. With my meager savings, I started a small building design company called Alden Designs. Not to boast about the Alden name, but to remind myself that I still carried the blood of builders. The early days weren't as bad as I'd feared. I landed a few small contracts, mostly renovating private homes or redesigning small shops. I did everything, drafting sketches, meeting clients, and overseeing construction. The work was grueling, But every time I saw a house completed according to my plans, I felt a joy no amount of money could buy. I worked from early morning until late at night, often sleeping in the workshop on an old armchair next to sketches with ink still wet. I told myself, this is the start. Just be patient and I'll make it. Juliet, my girlfriend at the time, was one of the few people who believed in me. She was a freelance artist with wild curly hair and eyes that lit up when she talked about art. We met at a small exhibition in Austin where I displayed some of my sketches. Juliet said she loved how I drew dreams with technical lines. She stayed by my side through the toughest days when I had only a few bucks in my pocket and survived on instant noodles for weeks. "Seth, you're going to make it," she'd say, squeezing my hand tightly. "You're not like them. You have soul." But my dream didn't last long. Just 6 months after starting the company, trouble began to pile up. A major client who had signed a contract to renovate a row of shops abruptly canceled without explanation. Then a trusted material supplier refused to work with me, claiming they were fully booked. Building inspectors started showing up at my sites, scrutinizing permits, measuring every millimeter, and making absurd demands. Once they even fined me for a safety violation I knew didn't exist. I tried to investigate, made calls, sent letters, but it was like throwing stones into the sea. Then one evening, while I was reviewing invoices in the workshop, Mike, my old colleague from Alden Construction, called. His voice was low and urgent, as if he feared being overheard. "Seth, there's something you need to know. Someone from the old company is sabotaging you. They're spreading rumors that your business is shady, that you're on the verge of bankruptcy. Some big partners are being pressured to pull out." I gripped the phone, feeling like the blood in my veins had stopped flowing. "Who's behind this, Mike?" I asked, though deep down I already suspected the answer. Mike hesitated. "I'm not sure, but you know who has the power to do this." He paused, then continued, "Be careful, Seth. They don't want you to succeed out there." I hung up, sitting stunned in the dark. My father. I didn't want to believe it, but everything pointed to him. He didn't just want me to fail. He wanted me to crawl back begging. His words when I left the company echoed in my mind. "Without the Alden name backing you, you're nothing." I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms until they drew blood. I vowed I wouldn't give up. Never. But things kept getting worse. More contracts were canceled, one after another. An old client who once praised my designs told me bluntly, "Seth, I like working with you, but I can't go against the pressure from above." The bank refused to extend me more credit, citing high financial risk. I started falling behind on workshop rent and material payments. Juliet stayed by my side, but I noticed her eyes changing. She stopped talking about the future, only quietly helping with the electric bill or bringing food when I worked late. One night, after receiving another letter from an inspector demanding I halt all projects, I sat on the workshop floor staring at torn sketches. Juliet came in and placed a hand on my shoulder. "Seth, I can't keep doing this," she said, her voice trembling. "I love you, but this life, it's killing us both." I didn't look at her. I didn't want to see the disappointment in her eyes. "I'll find a way," I said, but my voice was weak, as if I didn't believe my own words. Juliet left a few weeks later. She didn't say goodbye formally, just left a note on the table. "Seth, I hope you find your path. I'm sorry." I held the note, reading it over and over until the words blurred. That day, for the first time in my life, I cried. The sense of loss cut into my chest like a knife. I'd lost my company, lost Juliet, and now I was on the verge of losing myself. I couldn't afford to keep the workshop. I packed my things, stuffed them into my old backpack, and knocked on the door of Theo Mercer, my college friend. Theo was a software engineer living in a small house in Austin with a cluttered garage. He looked at me, disheveled hair, rumpled clothes, and said only one thing. "Come on in, buddy. The garage is yours." I gave a weak smile, feeling like I'd hit rock bottom in both pain and despair. The days living in Theo's garage were the darkest of my life. I slept on an old mattress next to cardboard boxes filled with tools. Every morning I woke to the smell of motor oil and the sound of traffic. I had no company, no clients, just a few sketches and an old laptop. I considered quitting the trade, getting a desk job, or even crawling back to my father. But every time that thought crossed my mind, I remembered his contemptuous smile. No, I told myself, I won't let him win. Then one day, while browsing online in desperation, I stumbled across an architecture forum. I posted one of my designs under an anonymous account, a simple, space-efficient house with lines I'd spent months perfecting. I didn't expect much, just wanted to share a piece of myself with the world. But the next morning, I opened my laptop to find dozens of comments. "This design is brilliant. Who are you? I want to hire you." I sat there, staring at the screen, my heart pounding. For the first time in months, I felt a spark of hope. I started posting more designs, still anonymously. Slowly, I built a small but enthusiastic following. Some people messaged me asking if I took freelance projects. I began accepting small contracts online, mostly remote design consultations. I worked in Theo's garage on a rickety folding table, but I felt alive again. Each completed design was a small victory, a step toward escaping the shadow of Alden construction. But deep down, I knew the fight wasn't over. My father was still out there watching my every move, and I wasn't naive enough to think he'd stop. He wanted me to fail, and I knew he wouldn't hesitate to use any means necessary to achieve that goal. The days in Theo's garage passed like an endless loop. I woke at dawn, brewed a bitter cup of coffee, and sat at the rickety folding table to draw. My old laptop hummed like a tractor, but it still managed to run the design software. The small online project started bringing in enough income to cover the garage rent and buy some materials. I no longer dreamed of skyscrapers or million-dollar contracts. I just wanted to survive, to keep the tiny flame in my heart from going out. Every evening after finishing a sketch, I posted it on the forum under the name Shadow Builder. The name, chosen on a whim, perfectly reflected who I was. A quiet figure living in the shadows, yet stubbornly building. The positive comments from the online community were my only source of motivation. Some said they wanted to print my designs to hang in their offices. Others messaged me asking if I'd take on rural home projects. Those words, however small, were the medicine that got me through long nights when loneliness and self-doubt crept in. But I still felt an invisible pressure from somewhere. Every time I took on a new project, I couldn't shake the fear that it would be canceled, that another letter from an inspector would arrive. I started checking my email multiple times a day as if waiting for a ticking time bomb. I knew my father hadn't given up. He was the kind of man who never let go of anyone who challenged his authority, even his own son. Then one afternoon, as I finished a design for a client in Dallas, I heard a knock at the door. I was in the workshop, sweaty, my hands still dusty from fixing an old printer. The knock was light but steady, not like Theo's rushed taps or the loud bangs of delivery workers. I stood, wiped my hands on an old t-shirt, and opened the door. Standing before me was an old man with snow-white hair, dressed in a simple linen shirt and worn leather shoes. His deep blue eyes locked onto mine as if peering straight through my soul. I froze, unable to believe my eyes. It was my grandfather, Franklin Alden, the man I knew only from old photos and my father's distant stories. He'd left Houston when I was young, living somewhere in Europe, and I never thought I'd see him again. "Seth," he said, his voice low and slightly hoarse but commanding, "you've grown so much." I stood rooted to the spot, unsure how to respond. "Grandfather," I stammered, feeling like I was dreaming. "What are you doing here?" He smiled, a faint but warm smile, unlike the cold gaze in those old photos. "I'm glad you still recognize me," he said. "There are things I've let sit for too long. It's time to set them right." I invited him into the workshop, embarrassed by the mess. I pulled out an old wooden chair for him to sit on while I perched on a toolbox. He looked around, his gaze lingering on the sketches taped to the walls, the handwritten drafts, and the battered laptop. "You work here?" he asked, his tone not judgmental, just curious. I nodded and told him everything. From the day I left Alden Construction, started my own company, and faced the struggles that followed. I didn't hold back, not even about how my father sabotaged me, the canceled contracts, or living in a friend's garage. I don't know why I spilled it all. Maybe because he was the first family member to look at me without contempt. Maybe because I'd bottled it up for too long. He listened without interrupting, nodding slightly. When I finished, he sat quietly for a moment, his eyes gazing into the distance as if recalling something far away. Then he reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a thick envelope, and placed it on the table in front of me. "Open it," he said. My hands trembled as I opened the envelope. Inside was a stack of documents, stamped in red and clearly signed. I skimmed the text, my heart pounding. It was the paperwork for a trust fund established over a decade ago with details that took my breath away. My grandfather still held a 22% stake in Alden Construction through an anonymous entity based in Wyoming, and the person he'd chosen to inherit this trust was me. I looked up at him, my mouth dry. "Is this real?" I asked, my voice faltering. "Why me? I thought you'd given the company to Dad." He sighed, leaning back in the chair, his thin hands clasped together. "I never gave Gregory everything," he said. "I gave him control, but not total power. I've been watching Seth, watching both of my grandsons. Jet may be a bright boy, but he lacks patience, lacks integrity. But you," he looked me in the eye, "you have what I saw in myself long ago. Resilience, honesty, and the courage to stand up after falling." I didn't know what to say. All these years I thought my grandfather had forgotten me, that he was just a distant figure in the family's history. But it turned out he'd been watching silently, like a chess player waiting for the right moment to make a decisive move. "But why now?" I asked. "Why didn't you say anything sooner?" He gave a sad smile. "Because I wanted to be sure. I wanted to see you rise from the ashes. If you'd given up, if you'd gone back to beg Gregory, I would have chosen the wrong person, but you didn't. You kept going even when everything was against you." I held the documents, feeling like they weighed a ton. "I don't know if I can do this," I said, my voice small but honest. "Alden Construction is a beast. I'm not sure I'm strong enough to face Dad." He stood and placed a hand on my shoulder. "You don't need to fight," he said. "You just need to be yourself. I've set everything in motion. All you need to do is step into the game." He left that evening, leaving me with the envelope and a flood of unanswered questions. I sat in the workshop, staring at the sketches on the walls, wondering if this was the chance I'd been waiting for or just another trap. I didn't know what my grandfather had planned, but I felt a new energy inside me, a mix of fear and determination. That night, my grandfather's words echoed in my head. "Step into the game." It sounded simple, but I knew the game he referred to wasn't an ordinary chess match. Alden Construction wasn't just a company, it was an empire, a network of power built over decades with my father at its helm. Facing him wasn't just a family matter. It was a battle requiring cunning, patience, and a ruthlessness I wasn't sure I possessed. Elias Voss, my grandfather's private attorney, became my guide. He was a man in his 50s with salt and pepper hair and eyes sharp as a razor. Elias wasn't the smiling type, but every word he spoke carried the confidence of someone accustomed to handling big secrets. We met at a small coffee shop in Austin where no one knew who I was. Elias placed a black coffee and a stack of documents thicker than the envelope my grandfather had given me on the table. "Have you read it all?" Elias asked, pushing his glasses up the bridge of his nose. "I have," I replied, though in truth I'd only grasped a fraction of it. The documents were filled with legal jargon, numbers, and complex clauses I'd never encountered, but I didn't want to seem weak in front of Elias. "But I need you to explain it clearly. How do I activate control of these shares without starting an open war with my father?" Elias gave a faint smile as if he'd been waiting for that question. You don't need to start a war, Seth. You just need to show up at the right time in the right place with the right papers. Your grandfather set everything up over a decade ago. This trust is an ace in the hole, and you're the one chosen to play it. He began to explain. When my grandfather handed over operational control of Alden Construction to my father, he never relinquished full power. He retained a 22% stake through an anonymous entity in Wyoming, a state known for its strict privacy laws. This entity was managed by Elias and a team of lawyers with the condition that only my grandfather or his designated heir could activate its voting rights. My father, despite being chairman, held only 20% of the shares directly. This meant that on paper my grandfather, and now me, had a louder voice in the boardroom. But my father doesn't know about this? I asked, trying to wrap my head around it. He knows about the trust, Elias replied, but he thinks it's just a passive asset with no voting power. Your grandfather deliberately let Gregory believe that. He wanted to test his son, to see if Gregory was truly worthy of this empire. I frowned, and my grandfather thinks he isn't. Elias took a sip of his coffee, his gaze cold. Franklin saw that Gregory has talent, but his ambition has blinded him. He runs Alden Construction like a personal kingdom, not a company, and Jet. Elias paused, as if choosing his words carefully. Jet is an amplified version of Gregory, charismatic, clever, but lacking integrity. I sat in silence, processing it all. All these years I thought my grandfather had abandoned the family, that he didn't care about me or Jet. But he'd been watching us from afar like a seasoned chess player waiting for the perfect moment to make his move. And I, a man who'd lived in a garage, who thought himself a failure, was the one he chose. So what's next? I asked. Elias slid another stack of documents toward me. Sign here, he said, pointing to blanks marked in red ink. These are the authorization papers to activate your control over the shares. Once you sign, the trust's voting rights transfer to you. You'll become the largest shareholder in Alden Construction with 22%. I stared at the pages, my heart pounding. This wasn't just a signature. It was a declaration of war, even if no shots were fired. I picked up the pen, but my hand shook. If I sign this, everything changes, doesn't it? I asked, my voice quieter than I intended. Elias nodded. Everything will change. But are you ready, Seth? This isn't just about taking back power, it's about proving you're worthy. I took a deep breath and signed my name on each page. Each stroke felt like a knife cutting the last thread tying me to the quiet life I'd tried to build. When I finished, I felt both relieved and burdened. Elias collected the documents, nodding with approval. Good. Now we prepare for the shareholders' meeting. Shareholders' meeting? I echoed, feeling like I'd been doused with cold water. Yes, Elias said. An extraordinary meeting will be held in 2 weeks at Alden Construction's headquarters in Houston. You'll appear as the majority shareholder, and we'll announce your control. Gregory and Jet won't know a thing until you walk into that boardroom. I swallowed hard, trying to imagine the scene. My father sitting in the chairman's seat with his usual smug expression. Jet, now CEO, with his arrogant smile. And me, the one they'd written off as a failure, walking in with 22% of the shares. A ticking time bomb. I felt fear, but also a small flame igniting in my chest. For the first time in years, I felt I had a chance. Over the next 2 weeks, Elias coached me step by step. He taught me how to read financial reports, how to answer boardroom questions, and how to stay calm under pressure. You don't need to say much, Elias advised. Let the documents speak. The truth will do the rest. I also began reaching out to other shareholders, those Elias thought could be allies. One was Marcus Langley, a neutral investor holding 10% of the shares. Marcus was a quiet man with salt and pepper hair and sharp eyes. He wasn't in my father's pocket, but he wouldn't easily side with me either. In a discreet meeting at a small Houston restaurant, I shared my story, not as a beggar, but as someone who wanted to change Alden Construction. So what do you want, Seth? Marcus asked, tapping his fingers on the table. Revenge on your father? Or just to prove something? I looked him in the eye. I want the company to run right, transparent, efficient, and respectful to those who work for it. My father turned Alden Construction into a tool for his personal ambition. I want to set it back on track. Marcus was silent for a moment, then nodded. You've got guts, Seth. I'll consider it. But I warn you, Gregory isn't someone who goes down easily. I knew that. I'd spent my life in my father's shadow, and I knew he wouldn't surrender power without a fight. But this time, I wasn't the quiet boy or the humiliated supervisor. I had my grandfather Elias and 22% of the shares behind me. I was ready. The night before the shareholders' meeting, I couldn't sleep. I lay on the old mattress in Theo's garage, staring at the cracked ceiling. I thought of my mother, the sketches I'd drawn for her, and the days I thought I'd lost everything. I thought of Juliet, the way she left, and my father's words, "You're nothing." I clenched my fists, telling myself that tomorrow would be the day I changed everything. The day of the meeting arrived, a gray autumn morning in Houston, the sky heavy as if foreshadowing a storm. I woke early, standing in front of the mirror in Theo's cramped bathroom, staring at my reflection. My eyes were bloodshot from lack of sleep, but there was a smoldering fire in them, a fire I hadn't noticed until now. I wore an old white dress shirt, a borrowed tie from Theo, and a slightly tight suit jacket I'd bought from a thrift store. I didn't look like a major shareholder, but I didn't need to. I had the truth. And I had Elias. Elias picked me up at a street corner near Alden Construction's headquarters. He was dressed in a sleek black suit, holding a leather briefcase stuffed with documents. "Ready, Seth?" he asked, his sharp eyes seeming to pierce right through me. I took a deep breath, my heart pounding. "I don't know if I'm ready," I said, "but I'm not turning back." Elias nodded, a rare smile flickering across his lips. "Good. Today you don't have to fight. Just stand there and let the truth do its work." We entered the gleaming glass building of Alden Construction, a place that was once my home, but now felt like a hostile fortress. The receptionist gave me a curious glance, as if she didn't recognize me. I didn't blame her. I'd left 4 years ago with a backpack and broken dreams. Now I was back, not as a low-level employee, but as a majority shareholder, the holder of a 22% stake, a secret my father and Jet never suspected. The boardroom was on the top floor with large windows overlooking Houston's skyline. As Elias and I walked in, the room fell silent. My father sat at the head of the table, dressed in an expensive gray suit, his usual smug expression in place. Jet, now CEO, sat beside him, laughing with another shareholder, his voice brimming with confidence. Camille, my stepmother, sat in a corner, her hands clasped tightly, her cold eyes sweeping over me as if I were a stranger. The other shareholders, about 20 in total, were scattered around the long wooden table, some looking at me with curiosity, others whispering to each other. My father was the first to break the silence. He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing as if trying to make sense of a ghost. "Seth," his voice rang out, laced with surprise and contempt. "What are you doing here? This isn't your place." He glanced at Elias, then back at me, his gaze burning. "Who gave you the right to step into this boardroom?" Jet, who had been laughing, stopped abruptly. He turned to me, his smile twisting into a sneer. "Seriously, Seth? You're back to make a fool of yourself?" His voice was sharp, as if I'd just crashed his party. "Who do you think you are, showing up here after running off like a failure?" I stood there, the room seeming to shrink until it was just me, my father, and Jet. My heart pounded, but I fought to keep my face calm. I'd prepared for this moment, rehearsing night after night in Theo's garage, going over what I'd say and do. But standing before my father's glare and Jet's smirk, a part of me, the quiet boy from the big house in Houston, wanted to turn and run. Elias, standing beside me, didn't give me a chance to falter. He cleared his throat, his voice deep and steady like a commander entering battle. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, holding up a stack of documents with a prominent red seal. I am Elias Voss, legal representative of the Wyoming Trust, and today I present Seth Alden, appointed by Franklin Alden as the heir to control 22% of Alden Construction's shares. The room erupted in silence. My father shot to his feet, his face flushed, his hands gripping the table's edge until his knuckles turned white. "What kind of stunt is this?" he shouted, pointing at me. "He has no right to be here. He's a failure, a quitter." Jet scoffed, shaking his head, but I saw a flicker of unease in his eyes, as if he was trying to mask his anxiety. "Really, Seth? You think you can waltz in here and pull some kind of prank?" I stood still, saying nothing, meeting my father's gaze. My heart raced, but I kept my expression steady. Elias continued, his voice cutting like a blade. He held up the documents, the red seal of the trust glinting under the lights. "These are the authorization papers established by Franklin Alden over a decade ago. They confirm that Seth Alden is the heir to control 22% of Alden Construction's shares through the Wyoming Trust." The shareholders began to murmur. An older man, Harold, a longtime shareholder, pushed up his glasses and stared at the documents. "Franklin, he left the company years ago. How do we know this isn't forged?" Elias smiled faintly, as if he'd anticipated the question. He opened his briefcase, pulling out copies of the documents, complete with the original seal and notarized signatures. "Everything is legal," he said, handing them out for inspection. "Franklin never fully left the company. He retained control of these shares to ensure Alden Construction was led by someone with vision and integrity." My father laughed, but it was a forced, angry laugh. "Franklin? My father? He walked away when I took over. This is a scam. Seth isn't capable of leadership. He's just a failed designer living in a garage like a homeless man." His words cut like a knife, but I didn't let them shake me. I stood tall, looking at my father, and for the first time I no longer felt like the quiet boy from the big house in Houston. "I'm not here to argue, Dad," I said, my voice low but clear. "I'm here to do what Grandfather wanted." Jet jumped in, his voice sharp as a blade. "You think you can walk in here with a few papers and steal everything? You know nothing about running a company, Seth. You're a loser, always have been." I looked at Jet, and for a moment I saw the 15-year-old boy from that birthday party, the one the family doted on like a prince. But now I wasn't afraid of him. "Maybe I don't know much about power, Jet," I said, "but I know about building, and I know this company is heading in the wrong direction." Elias raised a hand, silencing the room. "We're not here for personal arguments," he said. "We're here to discuss Alden Construction's future, and to address some issues." He pulled another thick stack of documents from his briefcase, carefully marked pages. "I have evidence of financial misconduct involving Gregory Alden and Jet Alden." The room seemed to hold its breath. Elias began, his voice calm but razor-sharp. He presented emails, invoices, and internal audit reports, proving Jet had used company funds for personal trips, lavish gifts for his girlfriend, and even gambling. He also showed that my father had approved a series of Jet's failed projects without board oversight, costing the company millions. With each document presented, the murmurs in the room grew louder. My father slammed the table, his voice trembling with rage. "This is fabricated. You're trying to overthrow me. I built this company from nothing." "You took it over from Franklin," Elias corrected, his tone unwavering, "and you've let it veer off course. The shareholders deserve the truth." Marcus Langley, the neutral shareholder I'd met, spoke up. "Gregory, I respect what you've done for the company, but if these documents are real, we need to reassess your and Jet's roles." My father turned to Marcus, his face red. "You're siding with this kid, Marcus? You know who he is. A quitter, unworthy of the Alden name." Marcus didn't respond immediately. He looked at me, his eyes weighing me, then turned back to my father. "I'm not siding with anyone, Gregory. I'm siding with the company. And if what Elias says is true, we have a serious problem." Jet, no longer smiling, stood up. "You can't do this. I'm the CEO. I've taken this company to new heights." Elias held up a financial chart showing profit declines over Jet's 2 years as CEO. New heights? He asked, his tone laced with sarcasm. Or personal expenses covered by company funds? Other shareholders began speaking up, some asking questions, others demanding more evidence. Camille, who had been silent, finally spoke, her voice icy. "Seth, you're trying to destroy this family. Aren't you ashamed?" I looked at her, feeling like I was staring at a stranger. "I'm not destroying the family," I said. "I just want the company to be run right." The meeting dragged on for hours, filled with heated arguments and tense stares. But I didn't say much. I let Elias and the documents do the talking. Every time my father or Jet tried to push back, Elias produced more evidence, an email, an invoice, an audit report. Slowly, I saw the shareholders shifting. Those once loyal to my father began to waver. An older woman, Eleanor, who held 8% of the shares, looked at me with curiosity. "What's your plan for the company, Seth?" she asked. "If you take control, what will you do?" I took a deep breath, feeling the entire room waiting for my answer. "I want Alden Construction to be what my grandfather built," I said. "A transparent company where everyone is respected, from workers to shareholders. I want us to build sustainable projects, not just for profit, but for the community." The room fell silent. Marcus nodded slightly as if noting my words. Eleanor gave a faint smile, her eyes telling me I'd scored a point. My father, still red-faced, sat down, saying nothing more. Jet glared at me, his eyes full of resentment. But he too fell silent. When the meeting ended, Elias announced that the board would hold a vote within a week to decide my father's and Jet's roles. "We need time to review all the evidence," he said. "But today, Seth Alden has officially become the largest shareholder of Alden Construction." As I left the boardroom, my feet felt light, as if they could float, but my chest was heavy. I didn't know if I'd won yet. But I knew one thing. I'd stepped into the game and I wasn't backing down. The week leading up to the vote was fraught with tension. Finally, the day arrived. I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting my tie, feeling like I was preparing for a final battle. The boardroom that day wasn't as charged as the previous meeting, but the air was still heavy. My father sat at the end of the table, no longer exuding his usual smug confidence. He looked older, his eyes bloodshot, as if he hadn't slept in days. Jet sat beside him, his face pale, hands clenched as if trying to suppress his anger. The shareholders, with stern expressions, sat around the table poring over documents with absolute focus. The vote happened quickly, and when the results were announced, I felt my heart stop. My father was removed from his position as chairman. Jet was suspended pending a comprehensive internal audit. And I, Seth Alden, the one once called nothing, was appointed interim CEO. The room was so silent I could hear the ticking of the wall clock. My father stood, his eyes locking onto mine, not with anger, but with a pain I'd never seen before. "What have you done, Seth?" he said, his voice hoarse. "You've destroyed this family." I wanted to respond to say I hadn't destroyed anything, that I was only trying to save the company from his mistakes. But I said nothing. I just looked at him, and my silence seemed to speak louder than any words. Jet, before leaving the room, stopped in front of me. "You think you've won, don't you?" he whispered, his voice dripping with resentment. "You'll fail, Seth. You don't have what it takes to run this company." I met his gaze. "Maybe," I said, "but I'll try. And if I fail, at least I'll fail on my own terms." As the room emptied, leaving just me and Elias, he clapped a hand on my shoulder. "You did well," he said, "but now the real work begins." In the weeks following my appointment as CEO, I didn't make sweeping personnel changes or fire my father or retaliate against Jet. Instead, I focused on transforming how the company operated. I demanded transparency in all transactions, held meetings with workers to hear their input, and ensured every major decision was approved by the board. I wanted Alden Construction to be a place where everyone, from workers on the site to shareholders in the boardroom, felt respected. One evening, as I reviewed financial reports, an email from Jet appeared in my inbox. It was long, filled with apologies and promises. "Give me a chance, Seth," he wrote. "I know I was wrong, but I can prove I'm worthy." I read the email 3 times, searching for a hint of sincerity in the words. Finally, I replied with a single line: "Start as a regular employee." I didn't know if Jet would accept, but I wanted to give him a chance. Not out of brotherly love, but because I believed people could change. My father was reassigned by the board to a small suburban branch, a position with little power but one that kept him in the company. I didn't oppose the decision. I didn't want to push him out despite what he'd once done to me. But when I thought of him, I felt neither joy nor pity, just an emptiness, as if I'd closed a long chapter of my life. The employees who once looked down on me began to change their tune. Some nodded to me in the hallways, others sent emails expressing support. Hank, the old worker from the construction site, came to see me one day, his calloused hands clutching his hard hat. "You've made me proud, Seth," he said. "You're truly Franklin's grandson." His words left me speechless. I didn't know if I was worthy of them, but I knew I was trying. Every day I worked to make Alden Construction a better company, not just for my grandfather, but for myself, and for people like my mother who once dreamed of structures filled with light. The months following the shareholder meeting passed like a whirlwind, swift and powerful, pulling me into a vortex of responsibility and pressure. The office at Alden Construction's headquarters became my second home, filled with reports stacked high on my desk and meetings that stretched late into the night. I was no longer the Seth Alden living in Theo's garage, but I wasn't yet accustomed to the interim CEO's chair. Every decision I made, from approving a new project to reforming quality control processes, came with a haunting question: am I doing this right? One late afternoon, as I reviewed designs for a community housing project, my phone rang. It was Elias Voss. "Seth, do you have a moment?" His voice was calm and serious, with a rare hint of warmth. "Franklin wants to see you. He's in Houston." I froze, still clutching my pencil. My grandfather. Since our meeting in the workshop, he'd returned to Europe, contacting me only through brief emails with concise advice on running the company. I hadn't expected him to come back, especially not now, when I was still scrambling to keep everything from falling apart. "Where is he?" I asked, trying to sound calm. "He just bought a house in the Houston suburbs," Elias said. "He wants you to come by. I'll send you the address." That evening, I drove to a quiet neighborhood where red brick houses nestled under old oak trees. My grandfather's house wasn't large but well kept, with a small garden and large windows that welcomed the light. When I knocked, he opened the door, still in his simple linen shirt, his white hair glowing softly, his eyes sharp yet warm. "Come in, Seth," he said, his voice raspy but kind. "I just made tea." We sat in the living room, where old paintings of Houston hung on the walls beside a small, crackling fireplace. He poured tea, his movements slow, as if savoring the moment to study me. "You look tired," he said, sliding a cup toward me. "How's the company doing?" I told him everything, from restructuring the finance department and improving worker conditions to the tense meetings with shareholders. I didn't hide the challenges. Some employees still doubted me, some shareholders remained loyal to my father, and I constantly questioned whether I had the strength to keep going. He listened without interrupting, nodding slightly, his eyes seeming to see right through me. When I finished, he stood and walked to the window, gazing out at the garden. A light rain began to fall, the droplets shimmering on the leaves. "Seth," he said, his voice blending with the sound of the rain. "You don't have the fire your father has, but you have something I trust more: patience, integrity, and the courage to stand up after every fall. I didn't save you when you were living in that garage, didn't help when your small company collapsed. Yet you remained resilient and persistent. So don't doubt yourself. Move forward with strength. As long as you have a burning heart, every obstacle can be overcome." His words were like a fierce flame, rekindling my spirit and sharpening my focus after months of relentless pressure in my new role. Then he told me about the early days of Alden Construction, when he and a small team of workers started with simple projects, and how he dreamed of building structures that were not only durable but also brought hope. Then he dropped a bombshell. "I bought this house for you," he said softly. "Not to make up for anything, but so you'd have a place to rest, to find yourself again. You've been through enough, Seth." I looked around the room feeling like I was dreaming. A house, a place that was mine, not Theo's garage or a cramped rented apartment. "I don't know what to say," I said, my voice catching. "Thank you." He shook his head. "Don't thank me, thank yourself for not giving up." That night I stayed at his house. We shared a simple dinner, vegetable soup and toasted bread, but to me it was the warmest meal I'd had in years. We talked about small things, the sketches I'd made, the projects he'd built, and memories of my mother I only knew through stories. For the first time, I felt like I truly belonged to a family. 2 years have passed since that fateful shareholder meeting. Alden Construction has changed, not through loud revolutions, but through steady, deliberate steps. I'm no longer CEO. I handed the role to Delia Hart, a sharp, experienced woman I trust. Delia brought a fresh perspective with ideas about sustainable development and social responsibility, values my grandfather and I always wanted the company to embody. I remain a major shareholder, but have stepped back, only participating in strategic decisions to make time for what I truly love. I moved into the house my grandfather bought, but I didn't stay long. It was too large, too empty, and didn't suit my lifestyle. After a few months, I returned to Austin, where the golden sun and tree-lined streets still felt like home. The first thing I did upon returning was visit Theo, the friend who stood by me through my darkest days without complaint or expectation. I brought a gift of gratitude, a Lamborghini Huracan, a quiet but meaningful thank you. When he saw it, he jumped like a kid, hugging me so tightly I felt my ribs creak. He was overjoyed, and I was happy to repay my silent benefactor. Back in Austin, I began teaching building design at a community college, standing before students with bright eyes and big dreams. Looking at them, I saw myself 10 years ago, full of passion but riddled with doubt. I tried to pass on not just knowledge, but the belief that they could overcome any obstacle as I had. I established a fund in my mother's name to support homeless students learning construction or design. Each thank you letter from a recipient brought a quiet joy, as if my mother were smiling somewhere. Under Delia's leadership, Alden Construction continued to grow, not just for profit, but for the community, building affordable homes for low-income families, schools for rural children, and green projects to protect the environment. Each completed project was a reminder that I was on the right path. My father still works at the small suburban branch. Occasionally, I get reports about him. He works hard, quietly, without the smugness of before. Jet, after his email asking for a chance, accepted a job as a regular employee. He's now a project manager, not standout, but I hear he's changed, at least enough to avoid trouble. I didn't see my grandfather often after our rainy day talk. He returned to Europe, but we kept in touch through handwritten letters. A habit, he said, keeps the soul from being swallowed by technology. I told him about stepping back and passing the CEO role to Delia, and he fully supported it. In one letter he wrote, "Seth, living a free life is never a bad thing." I thought about his words often, especially on afternoons sitting in my small Austin garden, watching clouds drift across a gray sky. My freedom isn't as dazzling as Houston's sunlight or as grand as Alden Construction's buildings. It's a gentle gray made of peaceful days, completed sketches, and dreams no longer overshadowed by family. I realized something. Some things take years to reclaim, but the most precious thing perhaps is soaring freely on your own wings. Don't you think so? Let me know. Thank you for listening to my story, and I wish you freedom in your own world.